protection, mitigation programs, real-time security operations, and working collaborative with audit, compliance, and legal organizations. And so, welcome, David. And Jason Stradley is our other panelist, and Jason is a 4-time Chief Information Security Officer whose specialty is in the transformation of misaligned or immature cybersecurity programs into world-class programs, resulting in more nimble and agile organizations. Jason is an accomplished, versatile security executive with a successful track record of designing and implementing global cyber information security programs in multiple industries. David is also have received his BS in information security from Capella University, graduating cum laude. He also graduated as in Chief Information Security Officer program at the Hines College of Information Systems and Public Policy at the Carnegie Mellon University. Jason is a published author and holder of more than a dozen cybersecurity related certificates. And so I want you to welcome our panelists. At this point in time, let's set the stage for our presentation. The reality is, at this point in time, it's easier and less risky for criminals to hack into networks of small businesses, as stated by Forbes magazine. Now, I want to point out to you, we've heard a lot, and it's been in the news for the past 7+ years about large organizations being breached and hacked. Anywhere from Yahoo to Target to Sony, you name it, large organizations with very sophisticated cyber defense have been hacked. Often, when I advise clients, I tell them it's not if you will get hacked, but the question is when. And how can you properly react to that hack will determine the impact to your organization. And so small businesses are now becoming a major target. The last 6 months, now that organizations have moved to working from home. I'm trying to advance. Am I advancing or do I have somebody else advancing it?
It's me, Wheeler.
Okay, so yeah, so the last 6 months, organizations have moved to remote working. They have allowed people to work from home, to tap into their current network. Sensitive data is being transmitted from, in some cases, personal devices or corporate devices. The reality is that the hunt is on for the weakest link by the bad guys. And so when you're doing business with the CTA or other large organizations, you need to make sure that your small business is not the weak link in the chain. You have to stay diligent on keeping your environment safe. Now, on the next slide, we talk about a lot of the industry terms that are out there. And it is very, very complicated. You hear these terms and you say, oh my goodness, what does that mean? What is ransomware? What is kill chain? What is spyware? How do I recognize it? Well, we're going to try to dissect not all of these terms, but the fundamentals of keeping your environment safe. And with that, I'm going to let our next speaker, Jason, speak to things that you need to do.
Okay, thank you, Wheeler. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So just to do a couple of thoughts from the gallery. I mean, there are lots of pundits out there. You can pick quotes from, 2 or 3 dozen people. The first one is somebody that I've worked with before, Bruce Schneier. And this quote is, "Amateurs hack systems and professionals hack people." Remember this as we go forward in the presentation, because it has definite meaning in the kinds of things that we're going to talk about today. Next quote is from Richard Clark, who was the first national coordinator for security infrastructure protection and counterterrorism in the United States government. "If you spend more on coffee than on IT security, you will be hacked. What's more, you deserve to be hacked," unquote. Now, while that's a little severe, it's true. And there are many organizations that is actual fact. They spend more on coffee or tea or whatever your favorite morning drink is than is spent on IT security. So with that, we'll keep these two things in mind as we go forward, because a lot of this is even more appropriate and applicable to small and medium-sized businesses. Next slide, please. Go ahead and advance for the first box. So how? There are tactics, techniques, and procedures, and that's an acronym in the industry that has an abbreviation, TTPs. You talk to anybody in the intelligence community, they'll know what TTPs are. And those terms there, some of them from the slide we had a few minutes ago with all the words on it. The words aren't important. The fact is, and the important part is that there are many different tools and techniques and ways to apply those techniques that are used to hack both people and technology. And there are, at the core of it, there are some simple things that we can do to help defend and make it a little harder for those things to be used against us in any size business. Go ahead, next box, please. So the who. So there are really several different classifications of what we call cyber threat actors. So you have your nation states, so the big ones that we recognize: China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. Venezuela is starting to get active in it, a couple of other countries, but those 4 I mentioned are really the big ones. Organized crime, you name it. There used to be the Russian business unit. I think they changed their name. There are hacktivists like Anonymous that do things. WikiLeaks can also be classified as a hacktivist. You have competitors in your particular industry that might be, here's a good application. You're both competing for the same CTA contract, and they want to know what you're bidding, because if they find out what you're bidding, and they can underbid you and know that they've underbid you. Angry persons, disgruntled employees. That's also an important aspect to be careful of. And then you have your script kiddies, which are literally beginners, amateurs, as I indicated before, who want to prove their mark, and they'll go and download tools and learn how to use them and try them out in different places just to see if they can get them to work. And then once they get comfortable with that, then they'll start working their way into more and more complex capabilities. Next box, please. So why? What's the motivation? Well, financial fraud is probably the biggest. Theft, defrauding, theft of data from anywhere from credit cards to medical records to intellectual property, depending upon what you're trying to do at the time. And that's both from companies and from individuals. As we're seeing a lot as we get closer to election time, influence consumer and political opinion. I mean, it's rampant right now. It's hard to tell what's true and what's not true because of the proliferation of that. Ransom and extortion is over the past couple of years has become very, very popular with the onset of ransomware, that once it's inside your environment, it will just find its way to every piece of data that you have access to. And encrypt it, and you'll have to pay money in order to get them to send you the keys to be able to decrypt. And then the last one, excitement and fun. You know, as I said, the script kiddies, they want to, you know, try things and get their badges of honor. So that's pretty much the spectrum of why. Next slide, please.
Before we go to the next slide, Jason, I'd love for you to talk about the dark web and the dark web as a service specifically. It was listed under the how, under threat landscape.
Yes.
So,
Okay, so the dark web is a portion of the internet that's been labeled the dark web because it's not scanned and indexable through ordinary means. There's a whole culture that lives in the dark web, and part of that culture has manifested itself into hacking tools as a service. So at this point in time, I don't even need to be an expert in any of these tools to perpetrate a ransomware attack against somebody or any other kind of attack, or a denial of service attack. I just go to the dark web, and it's very easy to figure out how to go there. There's hundreds of articles on Google how to do it, and contact one of these providers, and there are hundreds of those as well. Pay them and tell them where to point the attack, and they'll do the work for you. And you'll, you know, whatever ransom or whatever gets paid to you. So these have already been, there have already been attacks that have been attributable to this kind of model, and it's going to keep growing. So what that means is that whole spectrum of actors that we saw in the last slide, all of them, for all intents and purposes, have access to all the same tools. So it's not just the nation states anymore that have access to the best, you know, the atomic weapons of cyber, if you will. Everybody's got access to it. It's only a matter of paying for it. So that makes things very, very interesting, and you know, to potential, you know, the consumer at large and businesses at large, it should be a growing concern that anybody that has something against you or competes against you or is in the same vertical as you could potentially be an attacker now.
Very good. Thanks, Jason.
Sure. So just some statistics. So these are all from the 2020 Verizon data breach investigations report. You can go to Verizon and get a copy of it. It's a pretty good read. It's not too dry, and it has some pretty good insights in it. But some of the highlights. So in terms of tactics, 27% of malware incidents were ransomware. I think that's a conservative estimate. I think that's going to grow. 22% of breaches involve phishing. I think that one's also conservative, and I think it's going to grow and continue to grow. Errors were casual events in 22% of the breaches. So what does that mean, errors? Errors are people clicking on links that they really shouldn't click on, having things misconfigured, not changing the default password of your thermostat when you bring it home, all of the above. And those are, for those of you who play tennis, those are unforced errors, and those are really, really within our ability to control. So that's another point to remember as we go through this. In terms of the actor landscape, 70% of these were perpetrated by external actors. That seems to stay about pretty steady. If you look at the statistics over the past 12 to 15 years, it's always about 70 from external, 30 from internal. Organized criminal groups were behind 55% of the breaches. That's a pretty good statistic, but if you dig down into that a little bit, what's happening is in many instances anymore, nation states are using organized criminal groups as proxies to try out new TTPs. So be careful when you read statistics, because the line between nation states and high-end organized crime is becoming increasingly blurred as we go forward. The intentions. Well, 86% of the breaches were financially motivated, so that's not a surprise. All these people want money, with the exception of those who are in it for excitement and fun. All the others are in it for some kind of financial gain, whether it's immediate or a little more long term. 37% of those breaches involve stolen or misused credentials. 10% of the breaches involved espionage. So I think that's going to grow over time as, especially with the new world order we have here, where the increased stresses on businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses. I think that's probably going to increase both as a way for a business to survive, and on the other side as a way for competitors to put the final nail in the coffin of one of their competitors. Victims, 28% of breaches involve small businesses. This is going to increase over time because the large enterprises are becoming, number one, saturated, and number two, a little more difficult to penetrate because of all the funding that they have and the capabilities that they bring to bear. 58% of victims had personal data compromised. So whether that's a credit card, a social security number, medical data, or all of the above, it's a big business. And at one point in time, a credit card number could sell for $150, and your medical ID for Medicaid was in the $200 range, because that they can reuse over and over again. Next slide, please. David, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jason. Just to build a little bit on what Jason had talked about on some of the statistics, I think he indicated that 70% were really done by external actors. That other 30% potentially, might be your employees or yourself. Well, not yourself intentionally, but unintentionally. Your workforce make mistakes. When Jason talked a little bit about, some of the victims and information, being compromised and sent, I think you referenced credit card information, social security numbers, financial data, but it goes way beyond that. I think we're aware of some cases. I believe it was on 60 Minutes a couple of years ago, but there was a organized hacking group that actually got into an education system, downloaded the school nurse and social worker notes relative to some of the problems kids had discussed with her, and then they used that information to either extort those kids into sending them Bitcoin money, or the parents being able to describe what went on in their home. And so this is not just about social security numbers and credit card data. It goes way, way, way beyond that for some of these groups. What I wanted to walk you through was really the anatomy of an attack. We threw lots of terms at you. We've talked about some techniques and motives and everything else. And so I want to walk you through a basic model, the 5 phases of an attack. There are more phases, there's more complexity. We could blow this out and talk for hours on it. At least I could. But in this simplified version, I'd like to walk you through so you really understand what happens. And then I've got a couple of examples that will use the same model, and I'll walk you through. All of the attacks by the cyber criminals really start with discovery. They need to learn about your organization. They need to learn a little bit about you. If we can think, several decades ago, the 70s, when I started in information technology, the only place the credit card number was in my wallet. The only place my identity information was in my wallet on my driver's license. But we've put that all over the web. We've shared it in any number of sites. We've got so many different places to log on to. The password complexity, it's tough to remember them all. And so we make mistakes. We use the same passwords, we use similar syntax, and all of that information winds up being available. So in the first phase, really what the cyber criminal is working for is trying to find a weakness in your environment. And again, they may collect information from your website on people, email addresses. They may attempt to buy credentials that are already out on the dark web. They may run some hacking tools or discovery tools against your environment to see what's open, what doors and windows are open. It might even make some calls into your environment to see if they can get some additional information so they can move to the next phase. Now, the next phase is really the compromise. That's where they begin to get a stronghold in your environment. You may click on a link, you may visit a website, and there's a little bit of malicious code that's downloaded into your environment and then moves laterally. It may be that user ID or password credentials have been compromised, discovered, guessed at, and then used to access your system. And so the goal of the compromise is really to access your systems. From there, once there's access into the environment, what happens is it's a pivot and escalate. They move from basically just trying to gain access to now looking for high value targets. They may bring additional software in, they may scan your environment, they might take a look at what data you have on your file servers, within your email accounts, et cetera. They may even make some small, subtle changes within your environment. They may turn off logging. They may open up additional doors and windows. They may create some credentials for themselves. Once they've identified the high value targets, they have persistence. They live in your environment. Now, this is often not a jump in, jump out. It's a long process that potentially takes months. They set up additional credentials, they load additional software, they really strengthen their foothold. They become pervasive in your environment. In some cases, we've seen they've even created additional user accounts and authorities, administration rights within environments to be able to move again undetected. In the final phase of an attack, they own your environment. They are able to command it. And that's where data exfiltration, taking data, taking information out of your environment. It doesn't always happen as one big file. In some cases, it might be a database query, and they take 100 records or 1,000 records per day. They really try to move under the radar in an undetected manner. If it's to create business disruption, they may lock you out. They may change your password. They may delete credentials. They may do some malicious things in your environment to disrupt your business. In the case of ransomware that Jason talked about, they may also, what we call detonate the threat. They may execute the malicious code that begins to encrypt all the files in your environment and do damage. Next slide, please. All right, so using this same five-phase, five-step model, we'll walk you through a phishing attack. Now, phishing is an attempt to masquerade as a trusted entity or person to try to get you to give up information. Now, again, email targets can be derived from public websites. You can buy lists from other hacked sites. You can guess potentially at some of the syntax. For a lot of us, it's our, our first initial, last name, and then the organization we work for. First and last names, but a lot of times, if they know you work someplace, they can begin constructing a campaign to do phishing. Some very clever emails have been written to really lure recipients to take that next step, to click on a link to provide information. Those emails are often, again, they're very creative, they're very authentic looking. In a lot of cases, they've cloned websites. So when you follow the link, it looks like Bank of America. It looks like Expedia. It looks like Microsoft. But again, basically, they're trying to find a weakness in your environment. The compromise occurs when someone makes a mistake. They click on the link. They go to that website and either some malicious code is downloaded or users are asked to authenticate or provide credentials. Now, we've seen some emails that have been issued that look like they come from Microsoft, and it says your license key is about to expire. Go to this link and verify that your credit card information is correct and on file. And so folks will see that. They don't want to lose their Microsoft O365 access. They will click on that. They'll put in their user ID, they'll share their password. Sometimes if it's a small business, they might provide a credit card number. And at that point, it's been captured. A lot of times you can put fake information in and it'll say, okay, you've been verified. But again, they've got your information at that point. As it moves on to pivot and escalate, they use that collected information. Now, if someone had provided credentials to sign in, let's say in this example, it's for your O365 email environment. Well, they'll go ahead and use those to access your system. While they're in your system, they'll start looking for other high value targets. On the persistence phase, what we see in the case of these business email compromises, the BECs, they will clone your inbox and outbox. Now, just think about what we use email for. It's basically a huge filing cabinet. Some organizations that don't have data retention policies may have multiple years worth of email. Lots of attachments that are connected to it. And so gaining access to your email system, your inbox, Outbox, sent mail, just provides a wealth of information that can later be parsed and offered up for sale. Once they're in your environment, particularly email, they're able to get your company directory and all your contact information, which then can lead to a more sophisticated type of phishing called spear phishing, which is very targeted at an individual. That's really the command and control phase. Additional fraudulent emails may be sent. We've seen some examples where notes allegedly come from the CEO of the company, asking a clerk in the payroll department to send him the entire list of employees' salaries and information. We've also seen cases where vendors have been impersonated, and they send an email into the company saying, we've recently changed our bank account information. Please make all future payments to this account number and this bank routing number. And so, those go to the accounting clerks or people in the finance department. They start making payments when those invoices come in to fictitious accounts that, believe me, are not at Bank of America. They're probably somewhere deep in the Caribbean. All right, so let's move on to our next example. And our next example is ransomware. Now, ransomware is a bit of software, and it's extremely malicious and damaging an environment. Basically, it's a piece of software that once in your environment, depending on how it's set up, tries to walk or move laterally in the environment to every computer, desktop, laptop, PC, as well as your file server infrastructure and data storage, and scramble, encrypt, make it unreadable and unusable for you. This is really intended to create some pain and some business disruption. And so the way the attack works is, again, with readily available tools, you're able to scan environments. You're looking for a weakness. You're looking for a port that's open. You're looking for a door, someplace that you can get into. The compromise itself is when you find that port, and I think as Jason mentioned, when you don't change your default passwords on your equipment, your routers, your servers, your telecommunications environment, those password lists are available and for sale. Some folks, again, because of so many passwords that you have to remember, just leave the password as password or password 2020 or your last name in the year, because you have to change it occasionally. And so, again, once access to the systems occur, then in Pivot and Escalate, they begin looking for high-value targets. They begin scanning the environments, understanding where you keep your files, what's available, what's important, what are some of those encrypting targets. They download the ransomware into the environment. Typically in persistence, they'll go make modifications to your logon scripts. And so when you or anybody else in your organization logs in, that ransomware is propagated, installed on virtually every machine that you get connected to. And in a lot of cases, new account credentials are created, either for future use or again, to cover up some of the breadcrumbs or trails. In the final phase on ransomware, it doesn't happen at once. It's usually a predetermined, or it doesn't happen immediately. It happens on a predetermined basis of a specific date and time. That ransomware kicks off, typically in the wee hours of the morning. And when you come in, all of your files are not found. And you'll typically get a pop-up that says, give you the name of the ransomware. It'll say that a payment is required of $25,000, $50,000, $75,000. If you want the encryption key, send that money to our Bitcoin wallet in the next 3 days. It's usually time bounded, and they step away. Now, the cyber criminal will look at their Bitcoin wallet for the next 3 days to see if you've made a deposit. If not, they shut down the operation and they walk away. Once your data is encrypted, there is no way for you really to get that back. And so I'm not an advocate of paying the ransom. You should maybe never pay the ransom, but a good mitigating control or practice is to make sure that, number one, you have taken backups of all of your critical data. You've encrypted it and you moved it off site. And so if you were ever subject to a ransomware attack, you could say, so what? Purge everything from the environment, copy your backups down, and you're good to go. Of course, the other thing in both this phishing and ransomware attack, mitigating controls or activities are really around strong password management and account management, expiring accounts, not using default passwords, et cetera. And so, all right, so we've walked through the attack, anatomy of attack, and so I'm going to turn it back over to our next panelist.
Jason, you're going to speak to this? You're on mute.
Okay, thank you. So some challenges to small and medium-sized businesses. So you folks face a different reality from large-scale enterprise organizations. So again, some of these statistics are from various publications, and the websites to download those are presented at the bottom. Most of them are pretty good reads. 56% of SMBs say they don't have any cybersecurity capability at all. 81% of those SMBs say they have experienced a cyber attack of some form. An average cost of a cyber incident in a small, medium-sized business is about $120,000. During such a breach, there's at least 8 hours of downtime experience, and that is, I believe that's a very conservative estimate. 68% of you don't have a disaster recovery plan. And 83% of SMBs said they don't have any funds set aside to deal with the repercussions of a cyber attack. So what the bottom line is that small, medium-sized businesses tend to be have underinvested and under considered the cyber equation because you're too busy trying to grow your business. I mean, it's understandable. But the result can be disastrous. So next slide, please.
So let's talk about some key takeaways as we sum up this presentation. It is clear that the threat is real, and you could be the weak link. Your company could be a weak link in the chain. Your employees. It is real, and you've got to protect your organization. So the recommendation is that you find a way to implement a security conscious culture. That means you as the CEO, you as the CFO, you've got to be aware that you should not be sharing your passwords and that you are protecting of the corporate assets. Because employees are going to follow the lead of their executives. You also need to put training in place. A lot of organizations went to remote working without properly training their employees on how to access their network from their homes or from a remote location. So you absolutely need to make sure that you have all of your employees that are regularly trained on protecting your environment, protecting your data, protecting your network. Most small size, mid-size organizations will have some policies and processes and procedures in place, but you need to make sure that you've got strong policies, processes, and procedures in place as it relates to security. There's frameworks out in the industry that talks about some fundamental policies, processes, and procedures that should be in place, and your organization should definitely have that. I want to point this out also. Many of us are trying to do business with large organizations. And those large organizations want to help grow small to medium-sized companies. But those large organizations also want to make sure that the small companies they're doing business with is properly secure. Because in some cases you may have access to their network, or you're sharing data or information or payments. You need to make sure that you have a strong security posture so you can make yourself more attractive to do business with large organizations. And of course, another key takeaway is having robust user account, password management programs, backup and recovery programs. So I got a phone call from a medical doctor who runs his own private facility. He said, "Wheeler, I just got hit by ransomware." My first question to him is, how frequently do you back up your environment? If you're doing daily backups, that's great. If you're doing monthly backups only, that's not too good. You need to find a way to make sure that you're doing proper backups and then saving of those backups. Because as David pointed out, the bad actors could be in your environment for months, and they slowly encrypting data and information, right? And so in order for you to properly recover that information from your backups, you need to make sure that you've got adequate backups and recovery capability and retention programs. Pursue technology currency. I'm sorry, if your software or your laptops or your desktops are 10 years old and the operating system is 10 years old, guess what? You're vulnerable for a breach. You're vulnerable. You need to get current. Those operating systems are putting in patches that will properly secure any vulnerability that they know of. Right? So therefore, you need to stay current with your operating system and keep your not only just your operating system, but any other software that you're running, make sure that you're current. You also need to enable endpoint detection. All the devices that we're using, whether it's laptop, desktop, mobile devices, Internet of Things, you need to make sure that you've got endpoint protection in place. And then there's a thing that's called tabletop exercises. In other words, practice what happens if you have an incident that you need to respond to. What happens if your network is down? What happens if you can't get access to your data? And so large organizations go through a process that they call tabletop exercise. They'll get everybody in the room. They'll have a playbook in place, who to call, what authorities to contact, right? Who are the critical people that need to be notified that we've got an issue? And then what's their recovery plan? Now, large organizations spend quite a bit of time preparing for the possibility of a breach. The message that we have for small to medium-sized organizations, you need to prepare for a possible breach. You need to also make sure that you've got regular processes in place and regular procedures in place that's going to help protect your environment. Remember, it's not if you will get breached, but the question is when. And what are you going to do to minimize the impact of a breach? Now, there's a best practice that's out there, and depending on the size of your organization, we recommend that you conduct regular IT and security risk assessments. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know necessarily your vulnerabilities, and you don't know how bad they are. Now, the beauty of having a risk assessment conducted is that you get a roadmap of here's some of your greatest risks that you need to start addressing and mitigating. It literally lays out a plan for you to sit back and say, well, I have limited budget, I have limited resources. Where do I spend my money? Well, you want to spend your money on the most vulnerable risks that's facing your organization, your IT operations, or your security operations. Those are our takeaways. At this point in time, we're going to go to the next slide, and I think we're going to open up the floor for questions.
Correct. Thank you, Wheeler, David, and Jason. I learned quite a bit of information. I encourage all of the attendees to go ahead and plug your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen or in the chat box. Either way, we will get them. And as you all begin to type, I will say that thank you again for you all as panelists, as well as you all as attendees for joining, and why this is important to CTA. Obviously, as David and Jason and Wheeler mentioned, sometimes the hackers go through the small businesses to get to the larger fish. And in some instances, if you're doing business with CTA, it matters more to us. But our concern is more so about business development where our small businesses, and making sure that you all are just thinking about and making sure that your business is aware of how these cyber threats come in. The risk assessment. Do you have a risk management plan? A lot of contracts beyond CTA may ask you for a risk management plan. And in that should also include cyber risk, right? Because you're also exposing your stakeholders to cyber threats and cyber attacks too. I think I see a couple of questions coming in. We did get notified that there have been a circulation to DBEs specifically to renew your certification or to make updates. And we want to caution you, that is a prime example of what David mentioned about the phishing or the ransomware that attracts you to, you know, it's normal things. You're a DBE certified firm. Quite naturally, you would inquire, but one wrong click on a link, you know, may expose your business and make you become more vulnerable to cyber threats. I have a question here for the panelists. It sounds as though it may be specific to software, but is online G Suite safe from ransomware or malware? In particular, is G Drive safe for ransomware or malware?
So, Jason, you want to answer that?
Yeah, let me take a try. As with most things, the answer is it depends. But let me give you a scenario. So your G Suite Drive, you can load the Google Drive and have it look just like an attached drive on your PC. So it might you might have C drive, and then a D drive is some local attached storage that's in your own network, and then the E drive is your Google Drive. When it's set up like that, it is not safe at all from ransomware. If that ransomware gets in your machine, it's going to encrypt your C drive, your D drive, and then your E drive. On the other hand, if you access it only through the web interface, then that gives you a little bit more compartmentalization and separation from your local, your traditional map drives. But you see, when you do that, you get into the whole security versus convenience thing. Having it as a map drive on your machine is very convenient. It looks just like your C drive. Having to go through the web interface, depending upon how often you access and how many files you have on and how much file transferring you do and editing you do, can become very inconvenient. So you have to ask yourself, this is all part of risk management, am I using that G Suite Drive to store files that I'm working on my C drive, and when I'm done with them, I store them over there? Or is it a place that I'm actually using for additional capacity on my PC? And depending upon the answer to that question leads you to, well, that's how I should connect to it then. So hopefully that answered the question, but if not, follow up and I'll try to elaborate further.
Got it. Wheeler, are you able to see the questions that's coming in the chat box?
Yes.
Did you want to take a stab at any of those, or you want me to just take them?
Well, so there's a question out here in case of Target, and most people know that Target had one of the largest breaches a few years back. A vendor had a vulnerability that opened a backdoor channel into Target's firewall. And so that's what we talked about. There's a weak link, right? The weak link could be a vendor, a business partner that is sharing information and have access to Target's network. Then the question is, when you have a breach, who's responsible for it? Is it the business partner, or is it Target? Well, I tell you what, there's some reputation issues and concerns associated with that, and the consumers are going to hold Target responsible more so than the backdoor vendor that was impacted. I guess the question is, in an ever-growing integrated marketplace, how reasonable is it to protect from threats seemingly out of control? David, would you like to answer that question? You take a step.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say in general, cloud environments are probably a little more safe now than on-prem environments, only because they have, larger investments that are made in their cybersecurity practices. But it's only as secure, again, as your policies, practices, and processes allow. And so if we think of an example like Amazon, right? They spend, I don't know, billions of dollars on cybersecurity in their hosting environments. The places where you store data, the S3 buckets, highly secured unless an administrator makes a mistake and opens that up externally, exposes it to the public internet. I think that may have happened with Chicago voting records a number of years ago. I think it happened at Target. Inadvertently, a bit was flipped and it exposed it. And where I'm headed with this is, there are controls that you still need to put in place. So the data that you put up in the cloud, do you want public internet to access that? Do you want people from their home PCs to be able to go direct at your sensitive data? Or do you want to put some layer of control in place that says, no. That traffic, that access can only come from Illinois. It can't come from Chechnya. It can't come from Egypt. It can't come from North Korea. It has to come from my business, from my environment. And so, the cloud, the technology, very powerful, but you have to put some guardrails around it. You have to be proactive in that thinking, and you need to take action.
There's another question out here about detachable backup drives, and is it more safe or not? And once again, I think the answer to this is it depends. Jason, would you like to answer that?
Sure. For pure in its pure form, yeah, detachable storage is safer from the perspective of ransomware, because what do? You create a document, you have it on your machine, and you plug in a USB thumb drive or something, and you copy it from your computer to that drive, and then you detach the drive and you go put it away. So on that basis, yeah, it's safer, because that ransomware, as long as that USB drive isn't connected, it cannot propagate to the USB sitting in a drawer. But if you have the ransomware and you don't know it yet, and you plug the USB drive in, it's going to propagate right to that USB and render it useless. So you have to have some situational awareness. If you all of a sudden lose access to a file on your laptop, don't necessarily immediately go and say, oh, I'll just plug my USB drive in and grab it back, because that might be exactly what the actor wants you to do.
I might also add, although a good practice, to store things off-site on portable drives, you need to think about, what if you misplace that USB drive? What if your laptop bag that's in the back of your car gets stolen or gets misplaced? And so if you are going to do backups to portable media, you want to make sure that those files, that media, is password protected and encrypted, and you have the keys, but not written on the side of the USB stick.
Yeah. I mean, and then you've got the cloud solution also, where you can back up to the cloud as another way. But once again, a lot of this depends, all right? And it depends on your practice, the frequency, of your capability to properly secure your environment. I think we've got one last question here, and we're just about out of time, and I'll put this question on the table. You mentioned that employees can be the main target for breaches. What's the best way to protect a company? And I'd like to take a stab at answering this question. Educate, educate, educate. You need to make sure that you have a robust educational program, a training program for all your employees as it relates to cyber awareness, cyber security, cyber protection, cyber defense. You've got to constantly train and retrain your employees, as well as your consultants that are doing business for you. The more they know, the more they will look out and identify things that are not normal. They need to know who to call, who to talk to, and what to look for. Once again, a significant number of breaches occur through employees accidentally. Therefore, the best way to defend and to defend your organization is to make sure that your employees are properly trained on the procedures, policies, and processes associated with good cyber defense. With that,
I might just add a quick example onto that. Organizations should consider, what their practice or policy is on employees, for example, emailing file attachments, Excel spreadsheets, et cetera, from their work computer to home. Now, best intention, right? Someone's going to go away for the weekend. They don't want to take their laptop. You'll get some discretionary hours if they do this work on their home computer, but you don't have control of that environment. And so what happens in a couple of years when son or daughter goes off to college and they need a computer and you give them your old computer? There's a good chance that that data that they've downloaded is still resident on that machine. Or your employee takes in that personal computer into Best Buy and asks the Geek Squad there to do an upgrade, put a bigger hard drive in it. They do it. They copy over the data. What do you want us to do with the old hard drive? Throw it away. That data is still readable and accessible. And so you really need to think about what your practices and policies are on data leaving your environment.
Yeah, and since we're out of time, I want to just say in closing, we have contact information that if you have questions, additional questions that you'd like to raise with Jamie, her contact information is available. And if you have questions that you like to raise of us, any one of us, you can reach us at our email that's listed above. Also, I want to take this time to thank the leadership team at CTA for allowing us, Juan Pablo, Jamie, and the rest of the group for allowing us to participate and provide you information on cybersecurity, cyber defense, and how to protect your environment. We really, really, really appreciate this opportunity, and thank you for pulling this together.
Absolutely, and thank you all. And I like how you said that it depends, Wheeler. By all means, this webinar was merely to make you all aware of the conversation so that you all have better practices internally to protect your business. But every situation, every business, every circumstance is so vastly different. And so I don't want to confuse the conversation with this is exactly this is just cyber proof. So just make sure that you take these hints. There will be a survey upon the conclusion of this event. We kindly ask that you fill out a very brief 5-question survey to give us a little bit more feedback about this conversation and other conversations you would like to hear in the future from CTA, Small Business Development and Outreach Team. It is 3:06. I thank all of you all for joining today's Protect Your Business Cybersecurity Training webinar. Thank you all, EC United, Wheeler, David, Jason, Angie, as well as my colleague Chanel Harmon. I wish you all a very great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.